Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, third part there for the 9th of May 2024, geopolitical side of the Ukraine war we're going to go through now. So there has been the victory parade taking place in Moscow today. At the parade in Moscow, the war criminals who carried out the massacre and butcher were seated directly behind Putin. So behind Putin sat Lieutenant Chaldum-Ul, Major Boris Dudko and Captain Sergei Bacharakov. All three fought in Ukraine and received the titles of Heroes of Russia. All three are accused of brutal war crimes. Chaldum-Ul, left in the screenshot, served in Ukraine in the 55th Separate Guards Motorized Rifle Brigade. Ukrainian authorities accuse the military from the 55th Brigade of holding more than 360 residents of the village of Yagodnoye in the basement of a school for almost a month in March 2022. There's a very good article written on their experiences. I forget in which media outlet was. I don't think it was the New York Times. Very good article on that, I think. The villagers were freezing outside and forced to strip naked, then tortured, and some were shot. During this time, 10 people died in the basement. Really horrific story, that. Major Boris Dudko in Ukraine served as deputy commander of the 124th Independent Tank Battalion of the 76th Guards Airborne Assault Division of the Airborne Forces. Military members of the division in Ukraine are accused of killing civilians during the occupation of Bucha. So yeah, it's not a fine array of people. It's an array of pretty terrible human beings, most notably this prize plum in the middle. And we go on to this. Now, I was wondering what these guys were initially sort of trying to say, but we're going to see what these guys do a little bit later. But this is in Warsaw, near the monument of fallen Soviet soldiers. So in Poland, this is. Ukrainian activists organised a performance. And this is what they do just here. And you're thinking, okay, nothing too... I like that it's not too disruptive. The traffic lights are red, they're stopping, and they're making a statement. Their clothes have got blood on it. There are statements on those clothes, and they just stand there in silence and then move off. And you're thinking, okay, that was interesting, that's poignant. I presume the Polish people driving will know what that's about, given the writing on their clothing and whatnot, and where that geographically is. But then these guys show up. I saw that first, and then I saw this. So this is the, as Jay in Kyiv says very rhetorically, filthy, barbaric POS, Russian ambassador to Poland, gets the deserved welcome at his attempt May the 9th PR stunt. Now, he has done May the 9th stuff previously. I think he was the guy that got covered in red paint last year, or was it 2022? To simulate blood. So why is the EU still allowing Russian passport holders to enter, says Jay in Kyiv. But anyway, you get this situation where he turns up, he's got the George ribbon on, and he's going to celebrate the Victory Day with some kind of statement and wreath laying at the Soviet monument there. People are sort of blocking his way. There's a lot of press going on, and then we see those women pop up, and I think this is really effective, what they do. It sent shivers down my spine actually when I first watched this. And hopefully you can hear that well enough. You have them screaming as if they are sort of being tortured or dying or have lost loved ones, or that anguished scream, while in the background that smug, smiling Russian ambassador is celebrating the Victory Day. So that's happening in Poland, and it is, of course, Victory Day, May the 9th in in Russia. Former Ukrainian commander-in-chief Valery Zaluzhny has been officially, who had been dismissed from military service. He's now been formally appointed as the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK. So that decree has gone through, and he, I guess, starts his job as of now. According to Zelensky's decree, Zaluzhny was dismissed due to his health condition, and at the same time, he retains the right to wear a military uniform. So it's interesting. Some people say he was fired, sacked, or moved sideways, or whatever happened. He is now ambassador to the UK. The question is, will he have as much effect in that position? Is that the best role for him, or is he being kept away from Ukraine? Quite often, when you have people who become politically problematic for you as a ruling administration, you often see them get moved to being an ambassador in a foreign country, because it just keeps them at arm's length, where they can still do things, hopefully, that are beneficial for the country. I don't know if that's the case with Zaluzhny. I don't know what the relationship exactly is between him and Zelensky. Ukraine's accession to the EU will solve the food problem, says the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Portugal. Quote, the Portuguese government's position on expansion is very favourable for strategic reasons, and for that reason it does not have the reticence or reluctance that the previous government had. So the Portuguese government saying actually Ukraine will be a really useful member of the EU. Now they might be a net, the initial stage is a net user of European resources rather than a net contributor to the EU budget. It might be a net drainer, but the long-term prognosis for the EU is a positive one with Ukraine in it. It's one of the breadbaskets of the world. It has IT expertise. It has natural resources aplenty, especially if it can have the Donbass region back. So there's a lot to be said for Ukraine being part of the EU, and Portugal have sort of changed their position with their new government there. German Development Minister Sven Schulze has arrived in Kiev for an unannounced visit. The visit is part of the preparations for a conference on recovery, which is expected to bring together about 1,500 participants, including heads of state and government, in Berlin on June the 11th and 12th. According to German media, Schulze's talks in Kiev will focus on expanding the Ukrainian power grid with German help and training skilled workers. So that's really good news. And the Ukrainian power infrastructure and grid needs an awful lot of attention at the moment. And we also have the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, arriving in Ukraine. Back to the land of brave, she says, in Kiev on Europe Day, she wrote. So that's fantastic, and hopefully things will come out from that meeting. UK's David Cameron has warned that the West has not learned lessons of the Ukraine-Russian war here. So in the first big picture policy speech as Foreign Secretary outside Parliament, Cameron is to warn the West, so it's not happened yet, but he often you get hold of the speeches first, is to warn the West is not learning the lesson of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and that authoritarian adversaries will only be spurred on if Western leaders show hesitation or caution. According to The Guardian, Cameron will stress that there has been insufficient engagement from allies in facing the realities of an increasingly confrontational global landscape, says the Kyiv Independent, whether through ramping up defence expenditures, confronting Iranian proxy activities, or advocating for women's rights within the Islamic world. Quote, we must embrace a more assertive stance in a world that demands resilience. If we take anything away from Putin's unlawful incursion, it should be the understanding that hesitancy and minimal action only embolden aggressors. Regrettably, I have witnessed numerous instances in my role where this crucial lesson seems to have been disregarded. Through our multi-year military funding, weapons provision and vital support to protect and repair Ukraine's energy infrastructure, the UK is standing with Ukraine. And of course, this is on the back of giving some extra funding to the Ukraine energy sector. We must all step up to ensure Ukraine has what it needs to win, says Cameron, through our multi-year military funding, weapons provision and vital support to protect and repair Ukraine's energy infrastructure. The UK is standing with Ukraine, so a bit of repetition there in that newspaper article. Sorry for reading that twice. So, right, this is then discussed. Well, let's not go to the nuclear part first. Let's go to what Ukrinform, woman from Ukrinform has said. So Russia needs to lose and lose badly. That's what every dictator on the planet needs to see, says Jessica Berlin. Our ability or failure to stop and punish Russia's crimes in Ukraine will deter or encourage the aggression of dictatorships worldwide and thereby determine the course of this century. So what she says here, I'm going to just read to you because I think it's important. She says a little bit extra to what we've just seen. Russia needs to lose and lose badly. Russia needs to crawl out of begging for mercy. That's what needs to crawl out of Ukraine on their knees, begging for mercy. Really strong rhetoric there, but I get this. That's what the Chinese need to see. That's what the Saudis need to see. That's what every dictator on the planet needs to see. This is really strong and really important. They need to ensure that they don't get any ideas themselves, because if what they see is, oh, Russia is allowed to invade a democratic European country, literally on the borders of NATO, to butcher senselessly tens of thousands of people, to threaten global food security, to cause refugee crises, to cause a kind of destruction we haven't seen on this continent since World War II. If they're allowed to get away with this in the 2020s and then get back to business, well, then nothing's going to stop the Chinese from attacking Taiwan or from pressing forward in the South China Sea, etc. Because NATO will have shown that we cannot even keep the peace in our own front garden. And that is much more dangerous than internal political chaos in Russia. The implications of this war are truly global. This conflict shapes, she says, our century. And what we do or don't do will determine the rest of our geopolitical arrangement for the EU, for the rest of this, for the next generations, she says. So that is really good, strong rhetoric from Jessica Berlin there to suggest she's a security and foreign policy expert concerning the war that's taking place at the moment. And Gabrielius Landsbergis, who's a foreign minister for Lithuania, is right alongside with this kind of rhetoric. We're going to just pop into what he says in Hard Talk on the BBC. So I'll let him speak for himself. Let's just turn up his volume a smidge.
Is your message to Western partners, ignore it. It's simply a bluff. Forget about the Russians being the most powerful nuclear weapons state in the world. It's irrelevant. He'll absolutely never use them. Is that your message?
I would ask a question. Can we count the times that he did that in the past? And I tell you, that's a number of times. He said
it's all bluff.
It was always a bluff. He has nothing to gain from it. He has all to lose. We're sending a very clear signal to Putin: if you threaten us, we back down. So now we have to ask a question. If he would attack another country and threaten with tactical nukes, what would we do?
In Washington, in Berlin.
So when you're seeing David Cameron say, look, we're not learning enough from this war in Ukraine, we are allowing Russia to really determine what's going on, and we're being sort of not strong enough in our support. And you've got Jessica Berlin saying Russia need to lose, and they need to lose badly, so all the other problematic regimes around the world learn a lesson from this. And when you've got Landsbergis here saying, and we shouldn't be kowtowing to what is, he claims, the empty threat, the just hot air of the Russian nuclear red lines. We all just need to be taking all of these opinions into and taking them really seriously and acting accordingly, I would say.
In London and of course in Moscow, they have to really consider very carefully the strategic realities in a way that perhaps living in Vilnius, you're a little bit divorced from actual responsibility.
Well, we're not divorced from actual reality.
Well, that's true.
We are, a country that is a frontline country.
Would you in Lithuania be prepared to send your own men and women to fight in Ukraine?
And this is what I was talking about in my military aid and equipment video, is that Lithuania are doing that, and Landsbergis confirmed that in this interview.
I think it cannot be moved out from the table. And this is, I've been very clear from the very start, that Lithuania will be part of any coalition that will help Ukraine win.
There's a real problem in Ukraine in convincing young men that it is in their interest to join the armed forces. Mobilization is a real problem.
It's very difficult to mobilize people when you're not providing them ammunition. And again, it's on us. So I would, if I were to look for the problems, I would put a very big mirror and sit in front of it and ask questions, not to Ukrainians, but to our own leaders. Dependency on country, a non-democratic country, it will hinder you in the future. It will harm you in the future. We've seen that with Russia. This is a very practical argument.
Sadly, we have to end there, but Gabrielius Landsbergis, thank you very much for joining me on.
And he's such a great advocate for Ukraine, this man. I think his father was a minister with the Lithuanians. I remember seeing him being talked about on Turning Points. So that's the Netflix documentary that I think you should all watch. It's very, very good, giving you an understanding of how we got to where we got to today with regard to Russia, nuclear war, Cold War, and the Ukraine war. Right, Polish prosecutors opened an investigation into a judge who fled to autocratic Belarus. A number of you have reached out to me. A couple of Polish people have reached out to say this really is big news in Poland at the moment. And the reason is because it's unknown how much information this man had. I think Talaria reached out to say it's possibly to do with PIS, a previous ruling party, and Donald Tusk. I don't think it is that, as far as I understand it. This is what the AP says, Associated Press. Warsaw, Poland. So Polish prosecutors have opened an investigation Monday after a Polish judge fled to the autocratic state of Belarus and asked for protection there. National Prosecutor's Office said it is looking into suspicions the judge had acted on behalf of a foreign intelligence service. The Internal Security Agency began a separate probe into the scope of classified information the judge had access to. Foreign Minister Radek Sikorski described the judge as a traitor and said the case was shocking. As the way I understand this is a pro-Russian almost agent, or certainly entity, who has defected in a sense to Belarus. And I think this is less to do with internal Polish politics, at least that's how I understand it, and more to do with sympathies for Russia and Belarus. According to Belarus state media, Judge Tomasz Schmidt told journalists in Minsk, that's the capital of Belarusian capital, that he was forced to leave Poland, a country belonging to NATO and the European Union, due to disagreements with the current authorities. Schmidt, a judge at the Provincial Administrative Court in Warsaw, gained notoriety in 2019 when he and his then estranged wife, engaged in an online smear campaign against judges critical of the judicial changes made by Law and Justice. So this is where there could be some of that Polish internal political stuff going on. So Law and Justice Party, the PIS party, were the ruling party before the present coalition. They were very much anti-Ukraine, but some people say they were anti-Europe and possibly moving the judicial in the wrong direction. And here we had a judge who was critical. Here we had a judge who was critical of the campaigns against judges who were critical of. Anyway, he would be. What I'm trying to say here is he's likely aligned with the PIS. So could that be why he's done a runner? Because now you've got Donald Tusk's party in. But actually, I think it's more to do with Russia, Russian sympathy. So he had worked in the Department of Classified Information and ruled on various cases related to the granting of security clearances. Justice Minister Adam Bodnar said in an evening interview on private broadcaster TVN24, quote, "We don't know what information he had," Bodnar said. In a letter he had sent to the president of the Supreme Administrative Court in Warsaw, Schmidt announced that he was resigning his post in protest, quote, "against the unfair and harmful policy pursued by the authorities of the Republic of Poland towards the Republic of Belarus and the Russian Federation. In other words, he's whinging that Poland is being harsh to Belarus and Russia. So I think it's fairly obvious where his sympathies lie. And that's his own language there, right? The letter was posted on the social media platform X, Twitter, in an account under the name Schmidt Thomas. The profile only began publishing messages Monday, and it was not clear if the judge controlled the profile. So we're yet to know exactly whether it definitely does come from him. In a separate post, the account accused Polish authorities, who are strongly pro-Ukraine and pro-US, of, quote, leading the country to war. A message that was then highlighted by Belarus's state agency Belta. So it could be that that messaging is coming from the Belarusians themselves, like taking on his profile on Twitter and using that to disseminate pro-Belarusian and pro-Russian views. Schmidt reportedly appealed to Minsk to Belarus's longtime leader Alexander Lukashenko for protection, saying he considers Belarus, quote, a country with great potential led by a, quote, very wise leader and a place where, quote, you can live peacefully. So again, where do his sympathies lie? Which side is his bread buttered on? But anyway, that's big news in Poland at the moment. Attention Finland, says Anton Grishchenko. Russian propagandist Solovyev. I've always felt that Finland wanted to go back to the Russian Empire. So, yeah, maybe you guys need to watch out in Finland. I had this feeling that they are like abandoned people, constantly trying to draw attention to themselves somehow. Sure, the dream of the Russian Empire is pounding hard in the heart of the Finnish fishermen. I mean, really? Is it? We'll help the Finnish fisherman if he acts that crazy. And the other people smirk. Oh, how funny you are, Solovyev. You and your genocidal rhetoric. Okay. We're now going to go to Latvia. So Russian intelligence services are increasingly recruiting Latvian citizens for malicious activities in Latvia via the Telegram Messenger app. This is reported by Delphi with reference to the Latvian State Security Service. So a bit of a warning there that the Latvians are under a bit of threat from Russian information campaigns. And the Slovak president, Peter Pellegrini, has stated the need for peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. He notes that he is ready to offer Bratislava as a platform for them. So Pellegrini is the pro-Russian president now. So you've got Robert Fico, the pro-Russian prime minister, and Peter Pellegrini, the president. Anyway, according to Peter Pellegrini, European politics, including Slovak ones, face a fundamental challenge to ensure peace in Ukraine and then in Europe to prevent the realization of tragic scenarios. Thanks for that, Ivan. And we have then Hungary saying they will not participate in NATO's long-term plan to aid Ukraine. Its foreign minister said on Wednesday, calling the plan a crazy mission. I mentioned this earlier. NATO allies agreed in April to initiate planning on long-term military support for Ukraine against Russia's invasion through setting up a fund worth 100 billion euros. I don't know what you do with countries inside the EU, inside NATO, that are acting fundamentally against the objectives of the EU and against the objectives of NATO. Like, what do you do with them? You've got a cat amongst the pigeons. And it is completely counterproductive for nations like Hungary and indeed Slovakia to have these prominent roles or roles that wouldn't otherwise have been prominent, but now they are becoming real thorns in the side of those two organisations. Yeah, very, very difficult situations there. And then you have North Macedonia that is also a member of NATO. Right-wing opposition wins elections there. The Conservative opposition party won a decisive victory in the country's dual parliamentary and presidential elections on yesterday. Pay attention to North Macedonia, says Ivana Stradner, who's a Balkans expert, NATO member state. Challenging times are on the horizon. Serbia and Russia are implementing a similar strategy they used in Montenegro. So let's read a little bit about North Macedonia. This is in Reuters. So in Skopje, North Macedonia's nationalist opposition began the search for a coalition partner on Thursday after voters, frustrated by lack of progress towards membership of the European Union, ended 7 years of rule by the Social Democrats. So the Social Democrats are trying to move them towards the EU. It hasn't quite worked out. Whether that's the Social Democrats' fault, whether that's EU making it difficult for them to join, I don't know. I have no idea. The VMRO DPMNE party won more than 42% of votes, with nearly all ballots counted. So that looks like quite a lot of votes given the plural electoral landscape, I think, there, from Wednesday's parliamentary election, giving them 58 seats in a 120-seat parliament versus 15% for the Social Democrats. In a runoff for the more ceremonial role of president, Gordana Siljanovska-Davkova, a university professor who is backed by the VMRO DPMNE, beat the SDSM-backed, so the socialist-backed incumbent Stevo Penderovsky in a landslide to become the first country's female head of state. The swing from left to right in the Balkan state of 2 million people was fueled by voter anger at slow development and persistent corruption, which have held up its 2005 bid to join the EU. The new party held power until 2017 before being ousted over alleged corruption. So the present nationalists were ousted 2017 because they were supposedly corrupt, and some voters expressed concern that its nationalist leanings could harm relations with the EU, neighbours Greece and Bulgaria, and its EU bid. Possibly quite likely. In 2001, NATO pulled North Macedonia back from the brink of civil war during an ethnic Albanian insurgency and promised faster integration into the EU and NATO. The country joined NATO in 2020. Albanians account for about a quarter of the population, and Albanian parties have been in most coalition governments since North Macedonia was formed when Yugoslavia broke up in 1991. The Albanian Alliance, VLENVIEDI, Vlenvredi, I presume, which secured 11% of the vote, is one possible partner for the nationalists, and the ZNAM, an ethnic Macedonian splinter from the SDSM, which received 5.5% of votes or 6 seats, is another. Talks are expected in coming days. Quote, "This was an epic victory for the VMRO DPMNE, said Peter Arzovsky, a Skopje-based analyst. Quote, "Relatively soon we will see contours of the new government." The ruling SDMS party conceded defeat late on Wednesday as a gap in votes announced by the election commission became clear, triggering celebrations outside the opposition headquarters during a rainstorm. So that is the nationalists taking control. Does that mean moving towards a pro-Russian positioning? I don't know. I don't know enough about North Macedonian politics, but certainly in other Balkan states and in Eastern Europe, with regard to, say, Hungary and to some degree Slovakia, populist nationalism is aligned more likely with Russia, with the Kremlin, than the Social Democrats sort of positioning who were previously ruling there. So that could be one to watch out for, especially as they are a NATO member state. And then we have Tucker Carlson still doing stuff. So it turns out that when he was out in Russia and he interviewed Putin, and then he's interviewed all sorts of ne'er-do-wells, really. Tucker Carlson also interviewed Tara Reid. I wrote an article on Tara Reid some time back. She's fascinating. She's the one who initially claimed to have been sexually abused by Joe Biden, but it appears that her claims were completely bogus and she was found out to be incredibly unreliable. And then, who knew, she defected to Russia. It's like, here's something against a candidate that Russia doesn't want to be in charge. He sexually abused me. Then he won against Trump, that the Russians wanted in charge. And then the person who accused Biden of sexual abuse then defected to Russia. You're like, I'm joining the dots here. And it looks like that was some kind of disinformation Russian interference campaign. And anyway, who does Tucker Carlson interview? Tara Reid. So Tara Reid now, if you look at what she said over the last, I don't know, however many years, it's just over pro-Russian propaganda. So in fact, I'm going to find that article and link it to you. So this is what I wrote for Only Sky back in May of last year. Remember Tara Reid, Biden's sexual abuse accuser? defects to Russia. And I give you a full account of the sorts of things she has said, the like working for RT, so Russia Today. I mean, she's just Russian propaganda. Being one of the keynote speakers or the key speakers at the anti-war Rage Against the War Machine event that was basically just a pro-Russian event, in all honesty, and then getting awards from like a communist group in the US, and just really, there's Tucker Carlson laughing along with her. So he's interviewed her before and whatnot. So is it any surprise that he's interviewed her? No. What does this tell us about Tucker? That he is just a Russian agent. Tucker Carlson is nothing more than an overt Russian agent. Anyway, go and have a read of that article. I think it's pretty interesting stuff in there. Right, then we're going to go to America and possibly another useful idiot here. Marjorie Taylor Greene has attempted to oust Speaker Mike Johnson. So Mike Johnson put the Ukraine aid and the other bills to the floor recently, and they got passed fairly convincingly with a lot of bipartisan support from Republicans and Democrats alike. And he has had this gun held to his head for a long time by Marjorie Taylor Greene. Donald Trump has been kind of sitting in the background because he really likes Marjorie Taylor Greene and had previously quite liked MAGA Mike Johnson. He was called MAGA Mike Johnson, not so much anymore, as Mike Johnson realised the need to get to the floor the Ukraine bill. He had seen the intelligence. He'd been pressured by Ukrainian Christians as well. I think that was an important component. And all these things came together. And he's like, yeah, this is the right thing to do. And I can no longer justify stalling this just because Donald Trump wants that. He then went and had a meal with Donald Trump. Donald Trump realized that you would lose key Republicans from the House of Representatives if they didn't put the bill to the floor. And so he sort of quietly agreed that Mike Johnson should do what he was going to do, because otherwise the Republicans would not have a majority. There were apparently a number of Republican representatives who were going to resign. So Mike Johnson was kind of forced to do that as well. And Marjorie Taylor Greene said, if you do that, I am going to move to vacate you as Speaker. And that she was doing that in a kind of very MAGA way, and expecting, I think, people to come to her aid in the Republican Party. It turns out that actually there were more Democrats who supported her move to remove Mike Johnson than Republicans. Only 11 Republicans actually said that they would be in support of that. 32 Democrats would. There's a lot of Democrats who don't like Mike Johnson. Most of those Democrats who kept Mike Johnson in there did so out of understanding the political landscape, not because they genuinely want Mike Johnson to be the Speaker. If you were to ask, would they prefer Mike Johnson or say Mike Lawler as Republican Speaker, to a T, everyone would have voted Mike Lawler rather than Mike Johnson, right? They don't like Mike Johnson because on every other topic, Mike Johnson does not have the same views, even remotely, as the Democrats. But he is willing to do bipartisan work. We've seen that with keeping the funding open, keeping the government open in terms of shutdown and the appropriations bills and whatnot. So they've agreed to keep him on. And what happened here was a real damp squib, is that Marjorie Taylor Greene said, I'm going to do it. And a lot of Republicans saying, don't do that. If you do that, you're a bit of a douche. And then she went and did it. And as she was speaking on the floor, she was booed and heckled, which was funny because she clearly didn't like being heckled. And she is famous for very inappropriately heckling President Biden at State of Union speeches. So she got some of her own medicine and absolutely didn't like it. It was something to see, actually. Anyway, this is good news for the US going forward in terms of bipartisan support. So things like Ukraine aid are more likely to take place because here is a challenge to Mike Johnson that has been soundly and roundly dismissed by an overwhelming bipartisan majority, 359 to 43. And then 21 didn't vote, 7 present. I don't know what that means, whether it means that they were there to vote but didn't vote rather than not turning up and not being there. So and then Mike Lawler, who I was just mentioning, who is I think he's married to a Moldovan, very pro-Ukraine. He's a Republican Republican representative from New York, says this.
Moscow Marjorie has clearly gotten off the deep end, maybe the result of a space laser. But
Moscow Marjorie has clearly gone off the deep end. That hurts. Maybe as a result of a space laser. She's famous for her conspiracy theory of Jewish space lasers on the border, nuts, things like that, because, you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene.
This type of tantrum is absolutely unacceptable, and it does nothing to further the cause of the conservative movement. The only people who have stymied our ability to govern are the very people that have pulled these types of stunts throughout the course of this Congress to undermine the House Republican majority.
And he's not the only person in the last few days from the Republicans who said the only reason we've not got anything achieved is because of ourselves, of Republicans. There was another one, what was his name? It's not Will Self, of course it's not Will Self, who said this as well the other day, a Republican coming out and saying, we need to stop looking and blaming the Democrats. We know what the Democrats are going to do. We know how they're going to vote. Like, the reason we haven't got stuff done is because people like this, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, people ruining the orderly processes of Congress with their kind of wingnut activities. And I think that's right. I think, you know, the Republican Party needs to purge itself of people like Marjorie Taylor Greene because they are no use to anyone. And, you know, the Republicans probably need to get back to doing their normal sort of Republican activities, you know, the politics of old, if you like. Right, we're going to move very quickly to Georgia. So Georgia has hit a new low, says Sergei Kabanetze, who is the ex-vice speaker of the Georgian parliament. So yesterday, government organised their party to call tens of thousands of opposition-minded Georgians, including minors and elderly, and curse them. Today, they announced the creation of the database of dissenters, basically monitoring Facebook likes and ha-ha. So a database will be created where information will be gathered about the persons who are involved in violence, other illegal actions, threats and blackmail, and who publicly endorse such actions. This is proper authoritarian move here from Georgia Dream. They are clamping down on dissenters. This is not good news for freedoms, liberty, for democracy in Georgia. It is worrying. Tim White says, an unstoppable force, though. Protests in Georgia are spreading exactly like in Ukraine's Maidan in 2014. Georgia Dream claims they tried to stage a coup, another Kremlin narrative. There's no need for that with elections in months, again, like Maidan. So the question is, will the elections be able to take place in a free and fair manner in Georgia? It is so important that they do. And what's happening as well? Well, Putin takes a gloves off in Georgia as hired goons brutally beat several opposition politicians all over Tbilisi within a few hours. So this is the news that Georgia's ongoing transformation into a Russian satellite also means its Kadarovization. UNM board member, bikers protest organizer and opposition leader's brother and pundit are beaten in an hour every day of not imposing costs on Ivanishvili increases costs down the road. And in fact, one of these is caught on camera. This is pretty brutal. I won't play it to you, but there's one of the people who was beaten up is set upon by these people, and then a bunch of others run out there and absolutely lay into him, and then all run off again, all dressed very similarly. This looks like a big old hit job there. And that is, it's either going to be Russia behind that or Georgia Dream behind that, right? Nothing else makes sense. And so, or both. And this is not good for Georgian democracy and for Western looking nation in that Caucasus area that is so important for being a thorn in the side of Russia, really. Putin's dream could come true, says Jay in Kiev. Dream come true would be to get Russian colony of Georgia into the EU. Imagine what he could do with one more Hungary. So that's looking at it from another direction, which is that actually if Georgia did get into the EU, but they did have a government that could be co-opted by the Kremlin, then that could be challenging. So new. US is incredibly concerned by anti-Western rhetoric coming from Georgia Dream's leadership in the past few days, according to the State Department. Obviously, it jeopardizes the relationship between our two countries, says the Department's security spokesperson. Or no, State Department, Department of State, I think. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting myself mixed up there. Point is that Georgia's one that we need to watch, just like North Macedonia, just like all of these countries around the world that are connected so often to what is going on in Ukraine, or possibly with regard to China. And it's why my geopolitical videos end up being far longer than I would like, because my goodness, everything is important. Everything fits into this tangled web of international geopolitical shenanigans. Thanks for watching. Take care. Speak soon. Toodle pips.